This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
IMF, where this all plays together, because it does. Professor Peter Kagwanja is the CEO of the Africa Policy Institute. He joins us in the hot seat this morning. Prof, good morning. How are you doing?
And you well?
Good morning, Salama Sana.
Salama kabisa.
Yes, it's a very, heavy morning given the fuel issues and the cost of living. So we are not even talking loud tones.
Soft tones.
We are now on soft tones.
It's interesting because then you're going to love to hear the proverb of today.
Yeah, today we are in Egypt, a beautiful country, and we talk about tourism. It is considered the world's oldest tourist destination because back in the days, the Greeks and Romans traveled there to just experience the pyramids at the time. But we talk about the Strait of Hormuz today, right? But we have the Suez Canal, which is responsible for around 12% of global trade. Someone asked the question, what can the world do with that canal right now to help transport the products that we do need this side of the world? But let's go to the proverb. If you are mighty and powerful, then gain respect through knowledge and through the gentleness of your speech. How would you interpret it?
I think the advice here is that you, if you are strong, be a gentle giant. Don't throw your weight around because that will not do you any good. So humility, it is said, is the best weapon of the mighty. Yeah. So I think that's what the people from the land of the pharaohs are trying to tell us.
Yeah.
Essentially, if you are, for example, a president, your humility, your kindness, your gentleness is what carries the day. Remember, President Kibaki would be so quiet until people ask, why is he not speaking? And then he would come out and say, you people have said what you wanted to say. So what should I say? You have said.
Yeah.
For me, it's to listen.
Yeah.
That's it. Be a gentle giant.
For sure. And even as these things happen, whether we like to admit it or not, when fuel prices go higher in the country, it's a policy issue, it's a regulation issue, it's a global issue. However, it is also ammunition for warring political sides, because if it goes high, that means the folks who are in a possible would-be opposition can say, you see, this is what you're doing to further deepen the pain of Kenyans. And then if there is any kind of intervention that's done by government, again, the people who would be pro the side say, well, you see, we've been able to come in and reduce the thing by 50% for the next 3 months. So it could be policy, it could be global, it could be geopolitical, but it's also ammunition for local politics. But taking those local politics and putting them to the side for a moment, when we look at economies, Prof, and we look at what's happening in the world at the moment, does it have a direct effect about the decisions then that are being made by government, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa today? And can they actually control this narrative, or is it something that's absolutely out of their hands? Before we look at the IMF and their hand in all of this.
I think the place to start is local. And I want to reiterate a statement I gave maybe a couple of months ago, that I don't see any opposition to President William Ruto larger than the economy. The others are normal opposition issues, but I think the greatest opposition he has is the economy. I said that in 2023, I repeated it in 2024, I repeated it in 2025, and I want to repeat it now. That economy is the greatest opposition to President William Ruto. Why is that so? It's because he himself rode to power on an economic platform. He told his predecessor that it is not a constitutional moment. It is an economic moment. Now, the fuel crisis which is largely global, and in its manifestation in Kenya, it is not helping his situation. It is actually worsening. Because it's an acid test as to how you are able to respond to a shared crisis like this one, which is a global security and fuel crisis, and shield your people or insulate your people from the extreme repercussions of such a crisis. But what is happening is that in Kenya, we seem to be having more than our due share, call it the lion's share of the global crisis, even compared with our poorer, landlocked neighbors. And the explanation we are giving as to why we should share the largest burden of the global fuel crisis is that we are a middle-income economy. And one wonders whether when you prosper, you're supposed to suffer more. It's ridiculous, almost facade, to imagine that when you grow richer, this is when the fangs of poverty should be biting you deeper. So there is no possible policy explanation as to why Kenya should be where we are. We do admit that there is a global fuel crisis, a global energy crisis. But what we are looking at is the response that is coming from our own political establishment, so that we see whether it is basically mitigating against this global crisis, or it is basically compounding it. We are also looking at the way in which the government is positioning itself to insulate us from that crisis on long-term basis, because it is not a short-term problem, and it doesn't seem to be dissipating. It is actually escalating,
which is what governments would do. When you because governments don't operate in isolation. When we look at the geopolitics of the day, so what should they do? What have governments done in the past where you have a prolonging global crisis, and that you must shield and protect livelihoods and nations from the shocks of this, global issue? When you talk about then that it has to do with local politics, what should governments do to actually shield their people? What should Kenya do today?
Well, first and foremost, we must conceive what petroleum or petrol fuel is to our economy. It is by and large a bridge, because every sector of our economy is affected by petroleum in terms of consumption. So it's really the blood that really runs through all our economic arteries. And if you look at it that way, then the government has a regulatory role. And this regulatory role can move from the normal contingencies of the market, right, to even emergency. Because if there is anything that can ground an economy to a halt today, until we transit to renewable energies, it is petroleum. Because we are still totally dependent on fossil fuels. And as such, then, what we are trying to judge from what is happening is how expediently and how effectively the government is responding to this particular crisis. We all admit that this is not business as usual. We are not walking the park as we have done in times of prosperity, in terms of stability, in terms of peace, global peace. Now we are facing a problem. And why is it a problem? Because the Middle East has been at the center of the global fuel stability of fuel business. And the Middle East is burning. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is said to be the route for over 20% of global fuel supplies. And linked to that is the Red Sea, which also, they control about 20% of the freight of all commercial transactions globally. And therefore, the Middle East that we knew can no longer be a source of security. We have not even seen our government trying to tell us the alternative source of fuel that we are going to get if the Middle East continue to burn. Because you don't continue telling people, stay where you are and the typhoon is coming.
So what we're talking about here is that if there was a progressive thinking government, they would have started having the conversations. They would be floating ideas about, you know what, this is the alternative. The alternative is not for me to reduce VAT by 50% over the next 3 months. It's for the number crunchers and the policy experts to be sitting in Treasury, to be sitting in the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum to say, you know what, guys, these are our alternatives. These are the conversations that we are having today. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, that's what we are saying. We are also saying that you can look at this level, this crisis at different levels in terms of responses by the government. Obviously, we do know about the source of our energy. I know as a country, we are trying to diversify, shift more to the renewable energy, which are more sustainable in long term as a country, as opposed possibly to petroleum, which is largely controlled from the Middle East, so to say. Of course, that's not the case with America and the Western Hemisphere, which would depend largely on fuel from other sources, for example, within America itself, and Venezuela, that's Latin America, and so on. But for us in the Western Indian Ocean rim, we are by and large dependent on this kind of fuel. Therefore, our policy responses would ask several questions. The first question is, what preparations in policy terms and in logistic terms have we put in place to ensure that our economy is sustainable in the next 2 years with or without the crisis in the Middle East? That brings in the question of the reserves that we have put. The reserves that we have put for our people. And whether we have that legal and regulatory mechanism to do that. Yes, we do. A long time ago, we set the National Oil Corporation as our agency, our constitutionally provided mechanism for storing fuel on long-term basis, even for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, depending on what we want as a country. And therefore we can regulate it and so on. But what has happened? There's total ignorance, disregard of those mechanisms. So when we came together, which is now the second response, how do we ensure continuous flow of oil? We went to G2G arrangement so that there is supply. It was about supply, not about the costs.
It was about to make sure that there was a regular supply.
There is regular supply.
All right.
And this is the mercantilized, the kind of entrepreneurial mind of our politicians. It is not the mind of a nation builder. It is not the mind of a patriot. It's actually the mind of an entrepreneur. That you want supplies to the companies where you make profit. You want supplies to companies where you have shares. You want supplies to that's all. It's supply. About how that bears on the people is not the basic concern, which should have been the basic concern. And therefore, when we now begin to talk about policies, we are talking about policies that do not address the core issue of this crisis, which is the cost of petroleum vis-a-vis the rising standard of living or the cost of living in the country, which already devastated by, declining service provision, whether we are talking about education, we are talking about health, you are talking about water supply, and so on and so forth. So in short, we are still avoiding the big question. How can we minimize the pain of this fuel crisis on ordinary citizens? And we're simply having a dialogue of the fools, where you are saying we are doing well, and the person who is bearing the burden is crying out that I cannot bear it anymore. This is where we are, and that's why we see now we are teetering towards a crisis of a fuel, which is now moving from a fuel crisis to a political crisis. And you can see the political opposition has started now, drawing attention to the public about the need to stand up and ensure that we have bearable costs for fuel.
I mean, Prof, even when you talk about the cost of fuel as we speak right now, we've just gone through the landed cost at the port of Mombasa, and what that is, 106 shillings, you know. And with that, you look at the taxes that have been levied on these products that end up at the pump, and you look at all the levies that have been put there, and it's clearly over-taxation on Mwananchi. So even today, as we talk about, we compare ourselves with middle-income countries. Granted, sour, let's look at that. But all these middle-income countries that we are comparing ourselves with them, their fuel is still way cheaper than Kenya, yet they are middle-income countries with better economies than our country. So if the question is, we have to look at our fuel as compared to others, then the price of those countries you're comparing us with clearly takes us out of the equation, because the taxation is expensive in Kenya today. But even while at that, we've talked about fuel reserves. We have a policy that clearly directs on Kenya on what it is supposed to do. But there is no political goodwill to set up these reserves. The reason why today we find ourselves with the G2G to stabilize the dollar, G2G to talk about supply, and not addressing the problem in the room, which is the cost. Therefore, Prof, the position where we find ourselves today is because there is no political goodwill to address the problems that we find ourselves in. Would you reckon?
Yeah, and this is a problem we know. It's not a problem that is hidden. I think it's a political rhetoric that is making us a fool. And somebody said very cleverly that fools are gone in Kenya. They no longer exist. Yep. What we have are people who are suffering, who know why they are suffering, and you know what needs to be done if that suffering is to be alleviated. They know. So there are no fools in Kenya. The big problem, and I would say this bluntly, the big problem with our republic from the onset is when we allowed the politician to be a business person. And therefore to be two things at once, that you are the one regulating the state and you are the one allocating resources. And therefore, the wisest thing to do is to allocate opportunities and resources to yourself. And therefore, when you see the current oil crisis, the fuel crisis, it is the way it is because our political class has decided to do the most lucrative business in the world today, which is fuel.
Yeah.
The reason why Donald Trump is bombing Iran, why he bombed, Venezuela or invaded Venezuela, and why he's likely to invade other countries that have oil reserve is because you want to control petroleum as a main source of, wealth, and a very lucrative one at that. And therefore, in Kenya, look at the facade of the so-called G2G, government-to-government arrangements that have been talked about widely. We've said there is no G2G. There is G to private ownership in Kenya. Because if it was G2G, the petroleum reserve should be coming to the legally constituted mechanism of receiving our oil reserves and then distributing to the companies that are doing
KPC, for example.
So the national oil should be the one, plus whatever other mechanism we have within our constitution.
But I'm sorry, Prof. So what you're saying here is, for example, if fuel from one government, because G2G is government to government.
Yes.
Now, if fuel was coming in from one government, it would go to National Oil.
Yes.
It would not go to Kagwanja Energies.
No.
Which is what is happening right now. So that's why we talk about the entrepreneurship that then is going on.
Yep.
So does it then give rise to just not the notion, the reality that if something were to be done about these escalating prices, it could actually be done in Kenya?
We need to overhaul the whole architecture of energy business in Kenya. This is not to undermine, free enterprise or businesses, but to guarantee them sustainability over long term. Rather than focus on short-term profits of companies that we either know or affiliated to or own, we focus on stabilizing our fuel crisis as a security issue, not even as an economic issue, as a security issue, because fuel is a security issue in Kenya. If we run out of fuel, there is no way you are going to run this country. And therefore, it's one issue on which we can declare a state of emergency because we want to do that. So the G2G should have gone to National Oil or any other facility that is government as a receiver and under regulated costs and agreed upon consistency of supply, constant supply. So you deal with the two issues at once. One, control of costs, and two, control of flows. Now, what is happening is that we have started seeing companies, or governments or institutions with whom we have these arrangements are starting to put us on the alert that in the next, for example, by 26th of April, we are going to have hike in prices. So here we are reducing taxes so that we reduce cost. Out there, they are raising the cost of their fuel, contrary to what we had agreed. To peg the fuel on one, at one standard. So in short, what we are saying is that it is this kind of open lies about G2G, a concept, just lift the concept and call, a dog a hot dog. And one is a dangerous canine, the other one is a quick snack. It is not G2G. It is G to private companies in Kenya. The other thing you would have done is basically to agree on one company, and you give it the monopoly to supply to others at an agreed cost with the government. But now you are supplying it to multiple companies, which means, the market. I know there is the Petroleum and Energy Regulatory, Authority. But
you're saying some serious
prices.
things here, Prof. You're saying some really serious things here this morning, because essentially for years now, whether it's 2 or 3, Kenya has operated on this model, whereby fuel has been provided to the country, where under the assumption, I guess it's what people were told, under the assumption that governments are making the flows of petrol or fuel easier, so that Kenya didn't have to struggle to be able to get this. But what we are saying. And I mean, you say it very calmly, I guess, like the giant who is using tender words, that there is then a manipulation of the costs of the fuel that come to Kenyans because of the fact that this fuel is not going to government receptacles. It is going to individual entrepreneurs who then seem to be in this cabal, and they are the ones who then decide this is how much fuel is going to cost. But if you're going to compare that to what government should do, is that you're saying that, we see that we have to run on this thing, and that we should be doing everything possible to ensure that the price comes down. But that there are people who are making money on the backs of Kenyan suffering.
And it is natural. The role of the state is to control private appetites. There is no other. The real role of the state, the role of the rule of law government is essentially to control private appetites, private interests, and private ambitions. Because if you do not do that, then somebody will drive us to the Hobbesian state, which is where life is brutal, short, and nasty, where being killed is part of business, killing is part of business. So that's where the state comes in to regulate according to the law. And you regulate commodities that are scarce. You regulate issues that are what we call public goods. And we talk about national public goods. It is a certainty that you get fuel as an affordable cost. So therefore, this is not something you allow to go to the hands of private people to decide the costs.
But this is almost criminal from what you're saying. But then why? Okay, here's a different question, Prof. Why wouldn't government then call this out and say that this G2G arrangement cannot continue? It is unsustainable because of this very thing. Why wouldn't they do that?
Let's start by not criminalizing the companies that are in this business, because they have nothing. I mean, for them, they set up their companies to make profits.
Sure.
They set up their companies to make an extra dollar, an extra dime. That's all. And that's their role. So the issue is not the companies. It is us who define the infrastructure, the architecture that we are going to use to ensure that Kenyans get fuel in consistent supplies and at affordable cost. You cannot, Ethiopia is a middle income economy. Why should Ethiopia pay 118 shillings per litre, and a Kenyan is paying something almost 200 shillings per litre? And Ethiopia is a bigger country with a bigger responsibility than us, 132 million people. Double the size of Kenya, right? And with not the experience that we have. They have gone through hell, they have gone to hell and come back. Yet they are able to enable their boda riders, their ordinary matatu riders, to get fuel at this hour and this minute of extreme energy crisis at 118. Ethiopia is a middle-income economy, for crying around. It is one of the largest, our main competitor in the Horn of Africa as an economy.
Right.
And if we are looking at per capita, not per GDP per capita, the economy is larger than ours by far. But why is it they run the largest airline in the region, which is dependent on the fuels?
They've just done a grand dam with no loans.
With no loans in the name of Meles. I listened to Ethiopians crying out, Meles will finish the dam. Because you have infused patriotism, you have patriotic leadership that does not look at the profit, not the line at the bottom of the balance sheet. It is the future of the nation that matters. And therefore, when you set up an architecture that only look at the profit of private companies and not the interest of the population, I don't know whether you want to say that is criminal or you want to say that is physically treasonous. Somebody need to be held to account for putting on our heads an architecture of fuel supply and fuel business that impoverishes our economy. Because our economy cannot grow under this architecture. Truth be said, the G2G arrangement is good if it was intended to serve the purpose that it is intended to serve, which is to control the supply and to control the cost. That's what a government-to-government arrangement would do. It would look at the two. But now you close your eyes to the costing because you want to make profit.
I mean, Prof, what you're talking about is not something that has not been tried and tested in the country. Because in 2010-2012, NOC was active price stabilizer, played that role in the country. Because I remember at the time, whenever prices would come up, NOC, the national oil fuel stations, would be selling fuel at a much lower price as compared to private private firms, and you'd find that alone would stabilize the prices of fuel in the country. It has been tried, it has been tested in the country, and it proved that it worked. At the time when NOC was going down is because of the expansion. They had fewer fuel stations in the country and could not compete with their competitors, which then speaks to, if this is exactly what we knew as a country, that NOC would be able to stabilize fuel prices, all we needed was to invest more in them and expand across the country. But that did not happen. Therefore, we know the solution. We know what we must do. We just don't want to do it because in one way or the other, politicians are doing business with government and this is benefiting them. The reason why we seemingly are not willing to do that which we must.
This is a self-inflicted pain or problem, because we saw the Degwa Commission in the 70s come to fruition, because we asked this question as a people. Our founding fathers and mothers posed that question: should our political leadership do business or should they not be? Should government employees holding positions of authority be engaged in business or should not they be? And we, in a very leisurely manner, agreed, let them do business. But little did we know that we were opening the Pandora's box, that you are simply saying the one who is supposed to be dispensing public goods to everyone will now dispense those same public goods through their companies. So therefore, the challenge we are facing today is that whether we are talking about insurance firms, or you are talking about hospitals, or you are talking now about the fuel crisis we are in, the interests of the individuals who may or are members of the governments that we are looking up to for justice are now trading in those commodities. I know a lot of water has passed under the bridge. The Degwa Commission is there. But we can always salvage our situation because the future is larger than the past. That's how I saw it. We have a longer future than the past we have had, if you are a person of faith or basically optimism. And therefore, we can correct the situation as it is. For example, we need to very, very quickly, at this, in the date of this crisis, revise the G2G arrangement.
Can the people who were involved in creating this problem in the first place be trusted to fix it?
That is why, I mean, we are all Kenyans. And when this country bans, it is not going to ban for Professor Kagwanja alone. It will ban for all of us. It is not going to ban for William Ruto alone. It's going to ban for all of us. Let's be clear that we have a moral responsibility, a patriotic duty as a people to do the right thing. We know the temptation is greater to do the wrong thing that benefits you as an individual. For example, allowing a laissez-faire kind of arrangement in a commodity that sits at the heart of our economy. I mean, do you know, on a more leisurely, on a more, jocular note, that this is perhaps one of the few countries where people sit around the table to talk about where you're going to procure a liver, a kidney, a heart, because we are allowing ourselves to be a criminal economy, deliberately, and we are normalizing the abnormal. For example, at this juncture, a country like Kenya, which is a service economy, remember, we don't have minerals to back our economy. We don't have the kind of resources that other countries across the world, like Russia and so on, or even Iran, have to back their wealth. For us, we depend on our peace. We depend on our people and their ingenuity. We depend on the industry, the hard work of our people, and the innovative use of the few and little resources that we have.
So can you count on the folks? Because like you said, folks are sitting around a table and they're having a conversation about what's going to happen with probably one of the easiest and most affordable or most available low-hanging fruits, which is fuel for the country. It's a surefire way of making money for any economy.
Yeah.
And for making it right is probably the one that's a little bit more difficult for most economies. But folks sat around a table and had a conversation about what was going to happen with fuel that was coming into the country every month. And decided that it was going to go into the pockets of a few at the expense of the country. Can these same individuals who sat around this table and had this kumbaya moment over what was going to happen with the country's resources then be given the responsibility, and please hear my question.
I'm hearing you.
Can they be given the responsibility to fix the problem?
No. We fixed our problem long time ago because we thought about it. That's why I keep on drawing you back to the lessons of the past. We decided that every 5 years, we are going to judge those who are governing over us. And it doesn't matter what they say. We'll judge them as a collective. We did not leave it to plebiscites or to certain groups or institutions within the state. We took it directly to the Kenyan citizen, the voter, the 57 million people who owns this country. In our constitution, we went ahead to say that the owner of this country is the people, the sovereign. And that might sound a very ordinary, mundane statement. It is not. Come 10th of August 2027, we will judge those who are going to occupy those seats by what they can deliver. But in the meantime, we don't. The fact that we went to vote does not mean that we go to bed, right? The cost of democracy, we are told, is consistent, vigilance. So we are vigilant. That's why I woke up this morning to come to this station here and talk the way I'm talking. I'm talking for Kenya. You're talking for Kenya because as a citizen, I have the duty of vigilance. And what does that mean? If we know things are not going right, we have many other tools we can use. I can see people are going to are saying that we are going back to the streets.
Yeah.
Let those who are supposed to make decisions make the right decisions so that people don't go to the streets. Because when people go to the streets, now you up the gear.
Yeah.
You are no longer dealing with the fuel crisis. You are dealing with a political crisis. And the fuel crisis has not evaporated just because the political crisis has gone in. Why would you want to have crisis of a crisis of a crisis? So the answer to your question is very straight.
Yeah.
That Kenya will solve its own problem. It is only a matter of balancing our interests because we don't want instability in this country. We don't want to violate the rule of law that we have set upon ourselves, that we elect leaders every 5 years. And when they have finished their terms, we judge them. Those who have done well, we keep them. Those who have not done well, we change them. We change them. So I think this is where I started, and I would harken back to the same. To say that the 2027 election is about the economy, and more increasingly it will be about how we deal with the fuel crisis, because the current fuel crisis is going to shape the prospects of our economy come this year and next year. If we mishandle this fuel crisis the way we are already doing it, let's not talk about what we have done. Oh, we have achieved this, all these kilometers of roads, all these, lines of, whatever, these cables, this, that, the economic indicators, people come to shout, to say how prosperous, how successful they have been. You cannot be successful when people are paying the kind of fuel cost that we are paying. Right. When, in essence, it is possible. Yeah. If Ethiopians are doing it, if Tanzanians are doing it, if Rwandese are doing it, if Burundians, poor as they are doing it, right? Even South Sudan, which is on its belly, is doing better than us in terms of supply. And most of these, including Ethiopia, are all landlocked economies. Yes. They are paying levies at the toll. The Ethiopians are complaining about the port of Djibouti, which is not in their country, where the 90% of their goods pass. Now, for us, God gifted us with a coastline. Yeah. God gifted us with the proximity to the source of oil. Between here and Iran is 3,700 kilometers. Look at South Africa, which is double that distance. And fuel has to reach them, and it has to be costed. And even in South African fuel is cheaper than ours. Are you getting it? Yeah. Now, don't tell me that we are paying, an arm and a leg for our fuel because I'm a middle-income economy. For God's sake, take me back to the middle economy, if that is what is going to be meant.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Because the folks who introduced this middle income, low income, I don't know, whatever it is, are the big boys who sit at the IMF and all these financial institutions. And a gentleman called Moody, who I don't understand why he's so sad all the time, have decided that this is the global economic order. And if you fit into this band for whatever reason, this is what we are going to call you. What is the reason why nations have decided to stay according to that, or can you not run away from this global regulation? And which countries have ever really developed under these IMF regulation strategy, which have ever actually reached a place where they're not being called middle income, low income, least developing, more developing, whatever else that is thrown into that bag?
When you are elected as a leader of a country, or you are elected as leaders of countries, like we will be elected next year. I told you that I'm running for
I like the way
politics.
you threw that in there. We will be elected, yes.
Yeah. When we are elected next year, our ultimate responsibility that we cannot run away from is to protect the sovereignty of the Republic of Kenya. And sovereignty interpreted in its diverse forms, not in one way, the military way. Yeah. Sovereignty means the right to make a decision that favors your people. In the 1990s, President Daniel Arap Moi caved in to pressure
with the SAPs,
or from the IMF and the World Bank, and agreed on something that is euphemistically called structural adjustment programs,
yes.
which is basically not structural adjustment. It is structural poverty imposed on the people.
Yep.
I grew up in this republic, and I went to school in this republic with the 2 scholarships. The scholarship for my undergraduate and the scholarship for my master's. And when I wanted to go for my PhD, this country, this republic, got me a scholarship, Fulbright scholarship, to go to America to study. I come from one of the poorest families, you know, the post-Mau Mau families in Moranga. So we know what poverty is, but we also know what a functioning state can do to secure you in terms of protecting your sovereignty. Where am I going with this argument or with this discussion? I am saying I have no business discussing IMF because my business is the Republic of Kenya. My interests are the national interests of the Republic of Kenya.
So are you saying that
If
the people who are in leadership ought to have the same idea?
Yes, that's
ignore
the
the IMF?
Yeah. No, not ignore. If the IMF offers you a deal that benefits our national interests, so be it. They are our partners. If it offers a deal that undermines our national interests, it is not anything to talk about. You ignore it and give them matching orders. Now, when they come and pronounce a regime, for example, the kind of things they are talking about are not, I was reading around what they have been saying and to see whether they are offering any reprieve to a Kenyan citizen. None. They are basically looking at the interest of oil corporations in Kenya, most of which are foreign. So they are basically talking about the laissez-faire marketism or mercantilism, about opening the market, not bringing regulations, not doing this. Which country does not regulate itself? Even America, the mother of liberalism, is regulating its crucial things. I mean, I don't care if you want us to talk about the freedom to choose the baggers or not or baggers, but we're talking about global or national public goods. Public goods like education are not something that you debate with people. That's why Kibaki had no business with debating with the World Bank and the IMF
about how to educate
free
children.
education. He simply called the chiefs, called the elders, called everybody and said, ensure that any kid in any neighborhood go to school. And if you find any kid not going to school for any reason, just let the nearest authority know that the kid is not going to school. Because it is not the responsibility of the IMF and the World Bank to tell us what to do. They can do their gauging. For example, they have been rating us highly, the growth of over 5%. Now they are predicting that we will decelerate and we will grow by 4.6%. This is what they are saying. And they are still telling us to deregularize and liberalize the market as the way to go. I mean, they have not even started talking about the G2G because it is benefiting most of their companies or the companies that they are really interested in. So I have absolutely nothing against the World Bank. I have absolutely nothing against the IMF. I have nothing against international financial institutions because they have nothing to do with me. I am a Kenyan. And as a leader, my role is to safeguard the sovereignty of my republic. And the sovereignty of my republic means the security of our people, economic security, political security, and other forms of security. So in this regard, the IMF should not be something that we should be listening to or debating. We should start by putting our our architecture of fuel supply and fuel costing in place. Because that is what is our our fuel architecture is itself a kind of a pyramid. And it's a pyramid scheme that we need to deal with.
And you see, Prof, you bring something that is very critical, that we need to look at the interest of Mwananchi.
Yeah.
Why do I say that? Last week, Cabinet Secretary Mbadi was at the IMF trying to look for assistance from them. But one thing that came out from there is the Cabinet Secretary was asked to go and fix their books because there's seemingly some debt that is being hidden. And some, based off what experts have said, is among that is the pending bills that does exist. Securitization, which is being looked as part of debt that the government of Kenya has, but has not included in its debt registry. But if you look at all those things that are being mentioned back home, we have Kenyans who are saying, we have supplied to government. We've not been paid. The government of Kenya needs to pay them for services that have been rendered. You know, you talk about securitization and all this conversation that is ongoing. Kenyans say, we've not been included in this conversation. We do not know what this securitization means. But experts are saying this is part of debt that Kenya is accruing moving forward. So when you talk about finding solutions to our own problems, these are things that the government of Kenya knows it has to do. These are things that are required by citizens, by the policies, by the law of the land to be done by Wananchi. That we do not have to be told by IMF that there is debt that is missing. All we need to do is pay Kenyans and economy will sort itself out. Pay Kenyans their monies and there will be money in circulation and the economy will grow. You will collect more taxes as a government of Kenya that you do not need to go knock on IMF or World Bank because the economy will sort itself out. Kenyans will sort out themselves.
I agree with you 100%. That's why I say when you are assessing yourself as a person who should be seeking a public office, to govern the country, put more weight not on your rhetoric or your ability to, you know what they call the gift of the gab, the ability to talk people down and make them look stupid. and you more learned and able. That's not the way to go. Get the basics about the economy. When I thought that one day I'll be a leader in this country, I started off as a teacher. Then at some stage I made the decision that I'm going to be a public person. And God told me in his own way that I am capable. So I diversified. I went to the economics, studied economy. I went to psychology, studied psychology. And finally I studied law. And over and above my core area of political science and history. So that I can have this conversation we are talking about fuel tax and IMF from a knowledgeable point of view. Because as a public person, you need to be knowledgeable. Countries are run by knowledge, not by rhetoric. You can confuse me with your rhetoric, including, speaking in tongues because you are a Christian. but that will not save our economy from this fuel crisis.
The economy will not get saved.
The economy is not going to be saved. You can save me, you're not going to save the economy. So in other words, learn basic economics that if you want your country to be prosperous, make your every citizen taxable. And making every citizen taxable is getting them something to do every day they wake up.
That is going to end.
Yes, so you don't even need the IMF. You don't need the World Bank. Just ensure that every of your citizen who is 18 years and above wake up to do something that is taxable. Even if it's potatoes they grow, if they dig, pits or whatever they do, let what they are doing be taxable. then you have a problem. That is the principle we used under President Kibaki when he came into power.
Well, that's interesting because a minister who served under his government is the current governor of Kisumu. And Professor Peter Kagwanja said over and over again, the only way that you will then be able to develop to the levels where we are actually seeking Kenya to be is to widen the tax base, which is what you're saying today.
Yes.
So that you have more people in the pool and that you then get what it is that you need. However, that's not what's going to develop the country.
Yep.
What's going to develop it is now when you are able to have people have access to credit, first of all, who will then build the private sector, which is a direct feed into an economic growth.
Yes, I'm proud of Peter. I'm a Professor Kagwanja. I sometimes
Peter.
call him my namesake.
Yeah.
Because he is not just my teacher in the classroom, because he taught me at some stage. But he has also been a good teacher for me and many of my kind who love political economy. Because his statements are short, sharp, and I would say sweet and important. Why is that? Because currently we are having 3 million people, about that, who are paying the bulk of our taxes from the formal sector, and about the same number, 3 million, from the informal sector. And that is the net, out of 57 million people. Now, why are others Kenyans not paying? Because most of them are unemployed.
Right.
The others are supposed to be employed, but the government is not paying their debts. So in other words, we are having a government that is depending on external debt, the IMF, and that is depending on local debts and not paying. We introduced something called devolution and divided our country into 47 counties. Little did we know that we were also devolving the poverty of our people. Because in a sense, if a county is unable to pay debts to suppliers, what are we talking about? We are basically talking about devolving debts.
Right.
And the government does not have the moral persuasion to even get the counties to pay their debts. And it itself is not paying debt. So what we are having here are people who are living on hope that one day we will be paid. And what would happen if these people are paid? It would mean that the country would have a boom.
Yes.
There you go.
Because they will invest more, they'll be richer. So one request would make to the government today, as we face this fuel crisis, please pay your debts to all your creditors. Those who you have borrowed from, those who you have procured goods from, so that they can weather the storm as we go to the future. To change this architecture of fuel, fuel supply and fuel consumption,
Right.
and make it a security issue, because it is a security
issue.
Yep.
Sort out the mess, says Professor Peter Kagwanja, and you can actually do it. Those are the things that we're talking about this morning, necessary for us to have. We want to thank you for being here with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
He wants to be the senator for Moranga County.
Not really.
Not really. Something else.
The only thing I know is I'll not be a women rep.
Oh,
That I know.
that you know. Well, we don't know what it is, but I mean, from the way you're talking, it looks like this is the stuff Kenyans want to hear. Thank you
We'll see.
for joining us this morning. He's the CEO of the Africa Policy Institute, has been our guest this hour. Asante Sana, 9:02. Good morning.
The latest news from around the world. 94.